Friends, I feel it a great privilege to be with you this evening. I have just come from a trip throughout Canada, which I enjoyed immensely. And I think it is good that I'm here to say praises to Baha'u'llah for all of the good fortune I had on this trip. First, I would like to bring to you the loving greetings of the Universal House of Justice. It is one of the duties, the very pleasant duties that its members perform to convey greetings whenever they travel to different communities in the world. So you should consider yourself very warmly embraced by the House of Justice. In these days of great troubles here, I know that the House of Justice has been praying for the community and for the nation, and I was there, of course, at the time on September 11, and the House of Justice prayed the prayer for America in the holy shrines. I don't have any news because I've been away from home for so long. The only thing I can tell you is that before leaving, I received a report that the program of visits to the terraces and the shrine of the Bab, of course, has been going along very well. So, you know, the House of Justice had to adopt a plan for visits by reservation to the terraces, because to open them to the public, as we have the gardens all of these years, could lead to great difficulty, given the number of people that want to get in. And so there's a plan, a systematic plan of receiving numbers, and there are about 10 or so groups of 50 or thereabouts that come every day. And I was told before leaving that between June 4, when the terraces were open to the public, and about the time of my departure, very early September, more than 400,000 people had visited the gardens and shrines. So the shrines, the gardens have become really the hot spots for visiting at in the Holy Land these days. These are Israeli visitors we're talking about, because for the most part, the world is afraid to come to Israel. I don't know why, but it is. Well, friends, your hearts and minds are filled with concern about September 11. So I've decided to speak with you in this regard. What I have to say will be nothing new, you know it all, but it's good to recall these things together. In these times of peril, world peril, when so many people have suffered tragedies on a horrific scale, and hear rumors of more troubles to come, there are also prospects of world peace. Many years ago, Shoghi Effendi alerted us to the perils and prospects of the simultaneous processes of integration and disintegration, of order and of chaos, which characterize the operation of the plan of God in an age of transition. The developments related to these processes can be slow and imperceptible, or sudden and dramatic, alarmingly violent, or immensely progressive. As Baha'is, we should not be unduly surprised or at all puzzled by the commotion and fermentation arising from these processes. We've just had too much said to us about them. Baha'u'llah made no secret of the upheavals that will accompany so profound a change in human affairs. That is, we know full well that the old order is being rolled up and a new one spread out in its stead. And so he has kept no secret from us about the upheavals that should accompany so profound a change. The forces of his revelation impel the human race towards its coming of age. We are witnessing an acceleration of these processes. It is noteworthy that almost 5 months ago, events marking the completion of the edifices on the Ark and of the terraces of the Shrine of the Bab took place in the Holy Land, in the glare of public notice around the globe. You might say that the spiritual and administrative center of the cause of Baha'u'llah suddenly and dramatically emerged from obscurity. These events were preceded some months earlier by the momentous happenings associated with the Millennium Summit, when the largest number of heads of state and of government ever to be assembled met at the United Nations headquarters in New York. After a while, the situation in many parts of the world seemed to become increasingly deranged. And then came the horror in New York. For both the American Baha'i community and the nation of which it forms a part, this recent catastrophe was a wake-up call, a call that conveyed a warning and a promise. In Hidden Words, as you know, Baha'u'llah makes a statement that is both paradoxical and reassuring. It bears contemplation at a time like this. He said, "My calamity is my providence. Outwardly, it is fire and vengeance. Inwardly, it is light and mercy." You may wish to bear these words in mind as I carry on. The beloved guardian, as you know, prepared us well for current and future developments, both within and outside the faith, that will mark the rise of the order of Baha'u'llah. The issues before the world were clearly identified and discussed in letters he addressed to the Baha'is of North America. For instance, the compilation of his letters in the World Order of Baha'u'llah, the Advent of Divine Justice, Citadel of Faith, another compilation of letters to North America. So you're well equipped to deal with the issues in front of you. I want to refer to some of these texts particularly as I speak with you. For instance, the Unfoldment of World Civilization, which is one of the essays in World Order of Baha'u'llah, I think is particularly appropriate at this time. Gives us a broad perspective of the state of the world and of the processes that will have to be gone through before it achieves its destined goal. The Advent of Divine Justice, which, as you know, was written during the time of the 7-year plan. It was a little more than a year after the plan had gone into operation, the first systematic teaching plan based on the divine mandate given to North America by Abdul Bahar. And the Guardian in this marvelous document, as you know, amplifies that mandate, tells us how to understand it, and gives us guidelines as to how we should function, gives us spiritual prerequisites to achieve success in all of our teaching activities. He gives us insights as to the way we should operate in countries outside of our own. He gives us in it also choice quotations from the writings of Baha'u'llah, a compilation of writings which he calls immortal passages, which really, actually, friends, there are no better passages to be found in one place. And if you're really feeling a little down in the dumps and blue about what you're doing, and you feel that the teaching work isn't going too well, or even your inner life isn't working too well, if you will dip into those quotations, you'll be surprised what a charge you'll get from them. And I do it all the time, so I speak from knowledge. In fact, I'll use quite a few of them here this evening. Then, of course, there is challenging requirements of the present hour, which appears in Citadel of Faith, and I'll be referring to this quite a bit because it is quite relevant to what I want to discuss with you. Now, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about the state of the world, drawing on the writings, of course, and meeting the challenge. I have some particular remarks to make to the individual, and then I'll have a conclusion. I hope this won't go on for too long. About the state of the world, there are, as you know, two conditions affecting life on the planet. One is the decline of religion. The other is the lack of unity. Shoghi Effendi summarizes the consequences of these two conditions in Unfoldment of World Civilization. I'll go to it quickly and read the passage. He writes about the recrudescence of religious intolerance, of racial animosity, and of patriotic arrogance, the increasing evidences of selfishness, of suspicion, of fear, and of fraud, the spread of terrorism, of lawlessness, of drunkenness, and of crime, the unquenchable thirst for and the feverish pursuit after earthly vanities, riches, and pleasures, the weakening of family solidarity, the laxity in parental control, the lapse into luxurious indulgence, the irresponsible attitude towards marriage, and the consequent rising tide of divorce, the degeneracy of art and music, the infection of literature, and the corruption of the press, the extension of the influence and activities of those prophets of decadence who advocate companionate marriage, who preach the philosophy of nudism, who call modesty an intellectual fiction, who refuse to regard the procreation of children as the sacred and primary purpose of marriage, who denounce religion as an opiate of the people, who would, he says, if given free rein, lead back the human race to barbarism, chaos, and ultimate extinction. These, he says, appear as the outstanding characteristics of a decadent society, a society that must either be reborn or perish. Now, I am sure that all of these conditions that he's described are quite familiar to you. He wrote this letter in 1936. Spread of terrorism. At that time, we didn't know what he was talking about. Spread of terrorism. But here we are. And it's right in your front yard, as you can see. So, the Guardian gives us that picture as to the state of society when we are without true religion and we are lacking in unity. Of course, when we speak about religion, we are not talking about what other people generally regard as religion. We are not talking about the Sunday morning exercise and the part-time treatment of God. We are really, or the rituals that accompany all of that. We are talking about something else. We are talking about the forces of civilization. That's what we're talking about. Not this other business that gets walled up in buildings. Now, what does he have to say about religion? I mean, Baha'u'llah himself. He tells us rather remarkable things. He says that religion is the greatest of all means for the establishment of order in the world and for the peaceful contentment of all that dwell therein. He says the weakening of the pillars of religion hath strengthened the hands of the ignorant and made them bold and arrogant. Verily I say, whatsoever hath lowered the station of religion hath increased the waywardness of the wicked, and the result cannot be but anarchy. He tells us further, should the lamp of religion be obscured, chaos and confusion will ensue, and the lights of fairness, of justice, of tranquility and peace cease to shine. So we can understand Shoghi Effendi's description of the situation. Now, about our lack of unity, he appeals to us. Baha'u'llah appeals to us. He says, "O ye children, the fundamental purpose animating the faith of God and his religion is to safeguard the interests and promote the unity of the human race." To safeguard the interests and promote the unity of the human race. He says this is the straight path, the fixed and immovable foundation. Whatsoever is raised on this foundation, the changes and chances of the world can never impair its strength, nor will the revolution of countless centuries undermine its structure. These are vital statements. Then he says, and you know this well, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. So then we're in trouble, aren't we? Shoghi Effendi describes in great detail the vision of Baha'u'llah implied by the words I have just read. For instance, you know this text well. He says the unity of the human race as envisaged by Baha'u'llah implies the establishment of a world commonwealth in which all nations, races, creeds, and classes are closely and permanently united, and in which the autonomy of its state members and the personal freedom and initiative of the individuals that compose them are definitely and completely safeguarded. Now that opens a rather marvelous passage in which he provides details concerning this glorious prospect. This you will find in Unfoldment of World Civilization. Now, getting from here to there, from now to then, is the urgent challenge facing the human race and spurring the action of the followers of Baha'u'llah. Now then, how are we to meet the challenge implied? Well, to understand that, we have to think back a little bit. Let us recall how things got started with the coming of Baha'u'llah. You know that among the first things that Baha'u'llah did after announcing his mission was to address the rulers of the planet. That's what he did. He wrote a collective document to all of them, and he wrote individual tablets. Now, some of them received these tablets and others didn't. Some of these tablets are embedded in the Kitab Aqdas. Others were delivered. We are sure that at least the Shah of Iran received his because we know the history of his response. Well, nobody took Baha'u'llah up on his offer of peace, and he was ready to deliver the most great peace right then. So he said, now that ye have refused the most great peace, hold ye fast unto this, the lesser peace, that haply ye may in some degree better your own condition and that of your dependents. Now, we know what the lesser peace implies because of what the Guardian has told us. It implies the establishment of political unity. Baha'u'llah called, of course, for gathering together of world leaders at a convocation in which measures for unity and concord would be devised. It is rather remarkable that we have had a number of meetings of these leaders in recent times. I'll refer to this anon. Now, the most great peace, as we know, requires a monumental change in human conduct, implying inner spiritual transformation of individuals. This is assured, of course, through faith. Such a transformation is directly related to the efforts of the Baha'i community in promoting the principle of the oneness of humankind. Now, regarding these two processes, lesser peace, and it's a rather interesting term that Baha'u'llah coined, lesser peace. Regarding these two processes, these are Shoghi Effendi has indicated how and when they were set in motion and what lines they will follow. As you know, the passing of Abdul Bahar marked the beginning of the formative age of the faith. You might call it also the age of transition. That is, from the heroic age, the time in which the central figures of our faith lived, to the time of the most great peace and the establishment of a world civilization. There is a transition that will occur over many years, maybe many centuries, before we get to the most great peace. In this period, the Guardian tells us, we will see a number of things happen. We will see, for instance, the election of the Universal House of Justice. We will see the publication and codification of the Kitab Aqdas. We will see the implementation of the laws of the Aqdas. We will see the establishment of the lesser peace. We will see the extrication of the faith from religious orthodoxy, you know, the conditions under which we live in Iran and so much of the Middle East. And we will really come to that point at which the most great peace will emerge and the world civilization be launched. So this is a long period of adjustment and going through one process and another. This is, of course, the period in which the old world order will be rolled up, to put it simply. It is highly significant that in both processes leading to the lesser peace and the most great peace, the United States as a nation and the Baha'i community within it have special roles to play. It's a remarkable thing. And I refer you very quickly to Citadel of Faith, where the Guardian discusses this matter. And he tells us in no uncertain terms that there are two processes at work. And he tells us when they began. He was in the letter discussing the tablets of the divine plan, the tablet of Baha'u'llah to the rulers of this hemisphere. And he told us many things about that in this letter, which you have read, I'm sure, and know quite well. And he was talking about how we should carry the teaching work forward in the United States and Canada and Europe at this time. It was the second 7-year plan with which he was dealing. And he was talking about the blessings that would be on this community and that it should guard its birthright, which is the tablets of the divine plan, the mandate given to it, you see. So he said, how could it forfeit its birthright or mar its heritage when the country from which the vast majority of its members have sprung, the great republic of the West, government and people alike, is itself, through experiment and trial, slowly, painfully, unwittingly, and irresistibly advancing towards the goal destined for it by both Baha'u'llah and Abdul Bahar. Indeed, if we would read aright the signs of the times and appraise correctly the significances of contemporaneous events that are impelling forward both the American Baha'i community and the nation of which it forms a part, on the road leading them to their ultimate destiny, we cannot fail to perceive the workings of two simultaneous processes, generated as far back as the concluding years of the heroic age of our faith, each clearly defined, each distinctly separate, yet closely related and destined to culminate in the fullness of time in a single glorious consummation. Then he tells us, one of these processes is associated with the mission of the American Baha'i community, the other with the destiny of the American nation. The one serves directly the interests of the administrative order of the faith of Baha'u'llah. The other promotes indirectly the institutions that are to be associated with the establishment of his world order. I want you to see the distinction he's made. One, of course, is what we do, what we're doing under the divine plan. He says that concerns and is directly related to the interests of the administrative order. The other promotes, that is the lesser peace process, promotes the institutions that are to be associated with the establishment of his world order. There is a distinction, you see, between the administrative order and the world order. The first process, he goes on, dates back to the revelation of those stupendous tablets constituting the charter of Abdul Baha's divine plan. The other process dates back to the outbreak of the First World War that threw the great Republic of the West into the vortex of the first stage of a world upheaval. It received its initial impetus through the formulation of President Wilson's 14 points, closely associating for the first time that republic with the fortunes of the old world. Now he tells us anon that where he talks about the President Wilson, he says that Abdul Baha, listen to this, he says to her immortal president, the immortal Woodrow Wilson, must be ascribed the unique honor among the statesmen of any nation, whether of the East or of the West, of having voiced sentiments so akin to the principles animating the cause of Baha'u'llah, and of having more than any other world leader contributed to the creation of the League of Nations, achievements which the pen of the center of God's covenant acclaimed as signalizing the dawn of the most great peace. So there you have your dates. Abdul Baha's tablets are written between 1916 and 1917. Woodrow Wilson did his business during the First World War. The dates are almost close. Do you imagine that two things of such significance could have occurred within that time period? And that this country would be singled out for acting in relation to these two things, these two processes. All right, now, why then is this country singled out in this way? I think we have to look at a number of things. One, is to think of the tablet that Baha'u'llah wrote to the rulers of the Americas, and what it had to say, and the tone of it, in contradistinction to the messages that he sent to rulers elsewhere. You have to also consider the visit of Abdul Baha to North America. He spent 239 days in North America, and he visited the United States and Canada. Most of his visit was in places in the United States, as you know. Then you have to think about the tablets of the divine plan that were addressed, the 14 tablets, to the believers in North America, Canada and the United States. But then there are other things to consider, and I'll bring you to these now. And these are the pronouncements that Abdul Baha made while he was in America. And our guardian has drawn our attention to these in the advent of divine justice. He closes this letter by referring to these pronouncements. And I want to get into them now. He says in the advent, one more word in conclusion. Among some of the most momentous and thought-provoking pronouncements ever made by Abdul Baha in the course of his epoch-making travels in the North American continent are the following. May this American democracy be the first nation to establish the foundation of international agreement. May it be the first nation to proclaim the unity of mankind. May it be the first to unfurl the standard of the most great peace. He says, and I won't read all of them also, that America hath developed powers and capacities greater and more wonderful than other nations. The American nation is equipped and empowered to accomplish that which will adorn the pages of history, to become the envy of the world, and be blessed in both the East and the West for the triumph of its people. And similar statements of this kind. The Guardian then comments on them, and I'll take you quickly through some of his comments. He says, the creative energies mysteriously generated by the first stirrings of the embryonic world order of Baha'u'llah have, as soon as released within a nation destined to become its cradle and champion, endowed that nation with the worthiness and invested it with the powers and the capacities and equipped it spiritually to play the part foreshadowed in these prophetic words. Now, often, the friends of this country wonder whether they still have the blessings of God with them. And they worry about these things to a point of paralysis. Why are you worrying about such things when you have such words written by the Guardian to you? Listen to this. He says, the potencies which this God-given mission has infused into its people are, on the one hand, beginning to be manifested through the conscious efforts and the nationwide accomplishments in both the teaching and administrative spheres of Baha'i activity of the organized community of the followers of Baha'u'llah in the North American continent. These same potencies, apart from, yet collateral with these efforts and accomplishments, are, on the other hand, and listen closely, insensibly shaping, taking that word insensibly shaping, under the impact of world political and economic forces, the destiny of that nation, and are influencing the lives and actions of both its government and its people. I find this statement startling every time I read it, and I've read it 100 times or more. It's startling. Now, insensibly, it means that the folks who are operating under these forces don't know about it, don't understand it. He says no matter how ignorant of the source from which those directing energies proceed, and however slow and laborious the process, it is becoming increasingly evident that the nation as a whole, whether through the agency of its government or otherwise, is gravitating under the influence of forces that it can neither comprehend nor control, towards such associations and policies wherein, as indicated by Abdul Bahar, her true destiny must lie. Now he goes on later on to describe the situation in the world. He says the world is moving on. Its events are unfolding ominously and with bewildering rapidity. Now this letter, dear friends, was written on Christmas Day 1938, before the outbreak of the Second World War. Think about the date as I carry on here. He says, the potential storm centers of the earth are already casting their shadows upon its shores. Dangers undreamt of and unpredictable threaten it from both from within and from without. Its governments and peoples are being gradually enmeshed in the coils of the world's recurrent crises and fierce controversies. And he talks about the Atlantic and the Pacific shrinking into mere channels and so on. Then he says again, the world is contracting into a neighborhood. America, willingly or unwillingly, must face and grapple with this new situation. For purposes of national security, let alone any humanitarian motive, she must assume the obligations imposed by this newly created neighborhood. He didn't say for the purposes of Baha'i principles. He said for purposes of national security, let alone any humanitarian motive, she must assume the obligations imposed by this newly created neighborhood. Now, you will recall from your reading of history, not that you're so old and you lived back then, maybe, that it was one of those moments in which our people were indulging their fantasy with isolationism. They love to be, among themselves, not to get messed up with other people. Not that they don't like other people, but they think they should mind their own business. The first president of the United States, George Washington, gave them, in fact, advice. It was proper advice at the time. But he told them not to become entangled in the affairs of other nations. That is a fact. You can find it in the books. Right, listen to this. Paradoxical as it may seem, her only hope of extricating herself from the perils gathering around her is to become entangled in that very web of international association which the hand of an inscrutable providence is weaving. This is God's business. It is not the decision of the President of the United States or the Congress or the Supreme Court. This is God's business. So, friends, when we hear that the Americans are involved, are sort of moving around in the morass of Cambodia and are lost in the jungles of Laos and are monkeying around in Vietnam and are getting their boys knocked about in Lebanon and are fooling around in the Balkans and sticking their fingers in all kinds of things all over the planet, remember this. They have no choice. Whether they understand what they're doing or not, they have no choice. Because God has a purpose for this. They have a role to fulfill, and they will fulfill it. So, the Guardian then tells us in a letter, and he extends this discussion in the letter I referred to earlier in Citadel of Faith, challenging requirements of the present hour, to which I have already referred, and many pages of it. He talks, for instance, about what happened. You remember that the United States was minding its own business, or appeared to be, when Pearl Harbor, the incident in Pearl Harbor, woke them up immediately. At that time, the Baha'is were pursuing the first 7-year plan and conquering this entire hemisphere. And they did. And some of the conquerors are sitting with us. Now, so, what happened? What are the results of such involvements? The Guardian gives us an insight as to what happens when they get involved in things. He says, this nation so signally blessed, occupying so eminent and responsible a position in a continent so wonderfully endowed, was the first among the nations of the West to be warmed and illuminated by the rays of the revelation of Baha'u'llah soon after the proclamation of his covenant on the morrow of his ascension. No one living in Chicago should not understand what he's referring to. No? World Parliament of Religion, down there where this missionary mentioned the name of Baha'u'llah for the first time in the West and spoke about him. That's what he's talking about. This nation, moreover, he goes on, may well claim to have, as a result of its effective participation in both the First and Second World Wars, redressed the balance, saved mankind the horrors of devastation and bloodshed involved in the prolongation of hostilities, and decisively contributed in the course of the latter conflict to the overthrow of the exponents of ideologies fundamentally at variance with the universal tenets of our faith. Interesting. The Americans didn't know they did that, but the Guardian knew that. Now, friends, what is to happen? The Guardian tells us many and diverse are the setbacks and reverses which this nation extolled so highly by Abdul Bahar, and occupying at present so unique a position among its fellow nations, must alas suffer. The road leading to its destiny is long, thorny, and tortuous. The impact of various forces upon the structure and polity of that nation will be tremendous. Tribulations on a scale unprecedented in its history and calculated to purge its institutions, to purify the hearts of its people, to fuse its constituent elements, and to weld it into one entity with its sister nations in both hemispheres, are inevitable. So when you see what has gone on here, New York and whatever else will come after New York, and whatever has happened before New York, you should see the context in which these things are happening. And you shouldn't be frightened by this. You should see that the revelation is forcing circumstances that will lead us to the destined path that it has opened. The Guardian tells us that the country, the nation, is insufficiently schooled by adversity. And so we're learning things. Then he says this: whatever the hand of a beneficent and inscrutable destiny has reserved for this youthful, this virile, this idealistic, this spiritually blessed and enviable nation, however severe the storms which may buffet it in the days to come in either hemisphere, however sweeping the changes which the impact of cataclysmic forces from within and the stirrings of a divine embryonic order cataclysmic forces from without, and the stirrings of a divine embryonic order from within will effect in its structure and life, we may, confident in the words uttered by Abdul Bahar, feel assured that that great republic, the shell that enshrines so precious a member of the world community, of the followers of his father, will continue to evolve, undivided and undefeatable, until the sum total of its contributions to the birth, the rise, and the fruition of that world civilization, the child of the most great peace and hallmark of the golden age of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, will have been made and its last task discharged. So what are you worried about? Now, friends, you know what all of this means? We have to roll up our sleeves. It's working time. This is no joke. You think that these sweet words, these encouraging words are meant to put us to sleep? You're joking. You know, the House of Justice gave us a very interesting perspective itself, drawing on the Guardian's writings and so on, in its Res-1 message of 1998. I want to read that passage to you. It was a message in which the House of Justice conveyed to us, it's called Res-1 155, in which it conveyed to us a picture of what was going on in the Baha'i world. It was the second It was the second year of the 4-year plan, and things were moving along very well. And so there was a beautiful picture of things. And the House of Justice then said at that time, against this salutary picture of the community's prospects is the confused background of a planet at odds with itself. And yet, amid the widespread desolation of the human spirit, it is apparent that at some level of consciousness, there is among the peoples of the world a growing sense of an irresistible movement towards global unity and peace. This sense is being aroused as the physical barriers between peoples are being virtually eliminated by breathtaking advances in science and technology. Nevertheless, a mixed catalog of world-shaking tribulations and world-shaping developments keeps humanity concurrently dazed and dazzled. The storms and stresses battering the social fabric are incomprehensible to all except the relatively few of the planet's inhabitants who recognize God's purpose for this day. Our fellow human beings everywhere are insensibly subjected at one and the same time to the conflicting emotions incited by the continuous operation of simultaneous processes of rise and of fall, of integration and of disintegration, of order and of chaos. These Shoghi Effendi identified as aspects of the major plan and minor plan of God, the two known ways in which his purpose for humankind is going forward. The major plan is associated with turbulence and calamity and proceeds with an apparent random disorderliness, but is, in fact, inexorably driving humanity towards unity and maturity. Its agency, for the most part, is the people who are ignorant of its course and even antagonistic towards its aims. As Shoghi Effendi has pointed out, God's major plan uses both the mighty and the lowly as pawns in his world-shaping game for the fulfillment of his immediate purpose and the eventual establishment of his kingdom on earth. The acceleration of the processes it generates is lending impetus to the developments which, with all the initial pain and heartache attributable to them, we Baha'is see as signs of the emergence of the lesser peace. Unlike his major plan, which works mysteriously, God's minor plan is clearly delineated, operates according to orderly and well-known processes, and has been given to us to execute. Its ultimate goal is the most great peace. And of course, you know that the plan in which we are now engaged, the 5-year plan, is the latest stage in that minor plan. So the House goes on to say, at times it may seem that the operation of the major plan causes a disruption in the work of the minor plan. But the Friends have every reason to remain undismayed, for they recognize the source of the recurrent turbulence at play in the world, and in the words of our guardian, acknowledge its necessity, observe confidently its mysterious processes, ardently pray for the mitigation of its severity, intelligently labor to assuage its fury, and anticipate with undimmed vision the consummation of the fears and the hopes it must necessarily engender. So that was 1998. The House of Justice was preparing you for things. Now, friends, as you know, the 5-year plan launched last Rezvan is the focal point of our efforts at one of the most critical and promising times in the history of the world. The 5-year plan is intended to address humanity's most essential need, which is spiritual in essence. The horrible events of September 11 underscore the urgency of this need. The only fitting response of the Baha'i community to September 11 is to intensify its efforts to attend to the requirements of the divine plan in its current stage. The Baha'is of North America are especially equipped by virtue of the tablets of the divine plan to respond to the extraordinary opportunities which these world-shaking crises have created to reach the hearts and minds of the many who yearn for an answer to their fears. Advancing the process of entry by troops is, as you know, the theme that engages the efforts of the Baha'is everywhere, as individuals, as institutions, and as communities. This is a thought-provoking and action-oriented theme that suggests a wide range of activities appropriate to each of the three constituent participants in the plan. Now I want to address a few remarks to individuals. In this regard, of course, the importance of individual response can hardly be overstated. Engaging in the process of entry by troops enables us as individuals to fulfill our spiritual and social responsibilities at this stage in the history of the world. What each of us does as a Baha'i affects both the Baha'i community and society at large. You remember what Baha'u'llah said to us? He said, "Be not careless of the virtues with which ye have been endowed, neither be neglectful of your high destiny." He says that ye are the soft flowing waters upon which must depend the very life of all men. And so it is no ordinary responsibility that we carry. There are matters concerning the cause that only the individual can attend to. Only the individual. One of these is the primary duty of the individual, which is to teach the cause. No committee can do it. No assembly can do it. The House of Justice can't do it. Teaching committees, they can spend all of their days and nights working out methods and plans and whatnot, but in the final analysis, if the individual doesn't talk to his friend across the hall, there isn't going to be any teaching. There isn't going to be any expansion of anything. No plan is going to work. So, friends, the individual has a key role to play and must play it. That's why we keep talking about taking individual initiative. I'll come back to this matter. The other is striving to achieve inner transformation. Baha'u'llah tells us that the purpose for his coming is to effect that, and that if his revelation couldn't effect an inner transformation, it would be useless. So, doing this, attaining this inner transformation, demonstrates the power of the revelation. It demonstrates the virtue of inner character that shapes civilization. Reminds me that the Guardian had said to us in the advent of divine justice, reminded us that the tributes paid to the capacity, spirit, and high rank of the believers of the American Baha'i community should not be confounded, he said, with the characteristics of the people from whom God has raised us up. So we are not Americans in that sense. We are supposed to be becoming a new race with different ways of behaving. Now, about this teaching thing, listen to Baha'u'llah talking to us. He says, to aid me is to teach my cause. This is the manifestation speaking. He says, repose not on your selves. Repose not yourselves on your couches. Bestir yourselves as soon as ye recognize your Lord the Creator and hear of the things which have befallen him, and hasten to his assistance. Baha'u'llah is asking for assistance. Imagine that the manifestation of God is asking individuals to assist him. He says, that which hath been destined for the believer, him who aideth my cause, excels the treasures of the earth. So you're getting all kinds of offerings for your service. Fascinating. Beyond the treasures of the earth. I listen to people, I hear questions as I've gone along, people are worrying about whether they should go pioneering or they shouldn't go pioneering and all of these things. These are wonderful questions. But do you know of any place on the planet where we are 100%? Is Chicago fully in the cause? We have a sprinkling of Baha'is in Chicago. Is that it? We want the whole city. So we have a lot to go. So wherever you land, wherever you're standing, wherever you're breathing, get to it and teach the cause. The Guardian told us in the advent of divine justice not to wait for direction. Listen to this. He says, let him, speaking to the teacher, not wait for any directions. We're working our counselors and auxiliary board members and their assistants to death. They're trying to encourage us to teach. Why should they be on the road like that? He says, let him not wait for any directions or expect any special encouragement from the elected representatives of his community, nor be deterred by any obstacles which his relations or fellow citizens may be inclined to place in his path, nor mind the censure of his critics or enemies. They don't count. So let's get on with it, friends. And don't wait to hear. You can't get any more information than you have already collected from the House of Justice, the National Spiritual Assembly, the local Spiritual Assembly, the various teaching committees, and beyond them, the counselors, the auxiliary board members, and their assistants. There's no more. So get going. The Guardian told us in that very famous letter, the Advent of Divine Justice, that we should exploit the opportunities of what? He says, the opportunities which the turmoil of the present age presents, with all the sorrows which it evokes, the fears which it excites, the disillusionment which it produces, the perplexities which it creates, the indignation which it arouses, the revolt which it provokes, the grievances it engenders, the spirit of restless search which it awakens, must be exploited for the purpose of spreading far and wide the knowledge of the redemptive power of the faith of Baha'u'llah, and for enlisting fresh recruits in the ever-swelling army of his followers. Now, you can't tell me that you haven't noticed that people are a little more open to hearing what you have to say. You can't tell me it's not so, because it is so. That's what happens when you have a crisis and people are disturbed and concerned and worried and don't know what to do. Their hearts open up a bit and they want to hear from you. The Guardian said in this passage, which might well be applied to this morning, he says, so precious an opportunity, so rare a conjunction of favorable circumstances may never again recur. Interesting. Anyway, you know what I mean and you know where to find this. The other point I want to make to you, friends, is not to be afraid of criticism. This is something that hobbles us. We want to be popular. It's an American thing. Well, the Guardian says that we should not confound the characteristics of the faith with those of the people from whom God has raised us up. So we're not supposed to be worried about such things. He says, you know, in the Advent where he gives us these three prerequisites for success in teaching, and you know what they are. He tells us that we should then wage a double crusade. One, to attack our inner problems and resolve ourselves innerly, and then assail the problems of the outer society. He tells us that when we get going, we might be criticized. Listen to this. Let not, however, the invincible army of Baha'u'llah, who in the West and who at one of its potential storm centers is to fight in his name and for his sake, one of its fiercest and most glorious battles, be afraid of any criticism that might be directed against it. Let it not be deterred by any condemnation with which the tongue of the slanderer may seek to debase its motives. Let it not recoil before the threatening advance of the forces of fanaticism, of orthodoxy, of corruption, and of prejudice that may be leagued against it. Then listen to how he resolved this matter for us. He says the voice of criticism is a voice that indirectly reinforces the proclamation of the cause. Remember Abdul Baha'i in one of his statements? He was in Washington, D.C. You'll find it, I think, in Promulgation of Universal Peace or in Star of the West. When he got through with one of the churches there, he said he expressed the wish that after his departure, the clergy would rise up and attack the faith. He says, you know what would happen on that day? Greatest proclamation of the cause. So, friends, if you can stir up a little dust, and I'm not saying you should go and behave badly and not in accord with Baha'i principles, but if you rake up a little criticism, you should check that off. That's one of the things you'll be able to report when you get to the next kingdom and they ask you, what have you suffered on behalf of the cause? You have that to report. It'll be great music over there. Anyway, he says, the voice of criticism is a voice that indirectly reinforces the proclamation of the cause. Now, as to unpopularity, listen to this. Unpopularity but serves to throw into greater relief the contrast between it and its adversaries. You just think that our Baha'i community is just going along and it's no different from the society in which it operates. What use is it? What use are we if we are just like everybody else? What's the point of Baha'u'llah's suffering then? Why did he come here? And why did he invest us with such energy? And why did he offer us so many gifts if we are just like other people? He goes on, he says, while ostracism, now there we go, is itself the magnetic power that must eventually win over to its camp the most vociferous and inveterate among its foes. I suggest to you, friends, that you keep the Advent of Divine Justice close to your heart and you read it all the time, because this, to me, is the manual for your activities and for your salvation in this country. Now, then, Baha'u'llah tells us about the station that he has devised for us as individuals. My goodness, he tells us startling things. If we really think about them too much, we wouldn't do any work. But he doesn't want that. The individual has been raised to a wholly new station and has been assigned duties and responsibilities in the upbuilding of society. These reflect the stage of maturity that all people are destined to attain through the influence of the new revelation brought by Baha'u'llah. He tells us that if the veil be lifted and the full glory of the station of those who have turned wholly toward God, and in their love for him, renounce the world, be made manifest, the entire creation would be dumbfounded. Now, so finally, I want to bring you these words from the House of Justice concerning the individual. It was written in that letter that launched the 4-year plan. The House said Shoghi Effendi underscored the absolute necessity of individual initiative and action. He explained that without the support of the individual, at once wholehearted, continuous, and generous, every measure and plan of his National Spiritual Assembly, is foredoomed to failure. You see what power individuals hold in this day. You can withhold your support and cripple the cause. That's what it means. He says the purpose of the Master's divine plan is impeded. Furthermore, the sustaining strength of Baha'u'llah himself will be withheld from every and each individual who fails in the long run to arise and play his part. These are very serious words. So the House of Justice says, hence at the very crux of any progress to be made is the individual believer who possesses the power of execution, which only he can release through his own initiative and sustained action. Now, there's a reference here also to what the Guardian had to say about those who felt that they couldn't take initiative. It says, regarding the sense of inadequacy that sometimes hampers individual initiative, a letter written on his behalf conveys the Guardian's advice. He says, chief among these, you mention the lack of courage and of initiative on the part of the believers, and a feeling of inferiority which prevents them from addressing the public. It is precisely the weaknesses that he wishes the Friends to overcome. For these do not only paralyze their efforts, but actually serve to quench the flame of faith in their hearts. This is serious, friends. If we don't act, this flame doesn't, you see, blaze. Not until all the Friends come to realize that every one of them is able, in his own measure, to deliver the message, can they ever hope to reach the goal that has been set before them by a loving and wise Master. Everyone, he says, is a potential teacher. He has only to use what God has given him and thus prove that he is faithful to his trust. And now I'm really coming to the end because you're tired. I want to just hit on a few points. And mostly they'll be readings. I started by saying to you that Shoghi Effendi had alerted us to the simultaneous processes of integration and disintegration, of order and chaos that characterize the operation of the major plan of God. Listen to what the Guardian has to say, and this is in the Advent. He says, tribulations, however afflictive, must never shatter their resolve. Denunciations, however clamorous, must never sap their loyalty. Upheavals, however cataclysmic, must never deflect their course. Of course, you have a plan in front of you, a clearly defined course to follow. Far from yielding, he says, in their resolve, far from growing oblivious of their task, they should at no time, however much buffeted by circumstances, forget that the synchronization of such world-shaking crises with the progressive unfoldment and fruition of their divinely appointed task is itself the work of providence, the design of an inscrutable wisdom, and the purpose of an all-compelling will. A will that directs and controls in its own mysterious way both the fortunes of the faith and the destinies of men. Then he goes into this thing that we've heard so many times, such simultaneous processes of rise and fall, of integration and of disintegration, of order and of chaos, with their continuous and reciprocal reactions in each other, are but aspects of a greater plan, one and indivisible, whose source is God, whose author is Baha'u'llah, the theater of whose operations is the entire planet, and whose ultimate objectives are the unity of the human race and the peace of all mankind. And then he entreats us in this way. He says reflections such as these should steel, S-T-E-E-L, that steel, should steel the resolve of the entire Baha'i community, should dissipate their forebodings and arouse them to rededicate themselves to every single provision of that divine charter whose outline has been delineated for them by the pen of Abdul Bahar. Now, my other thing, I have two more. My other thing is from The Guardian. Remember, I also said at the beginning that it was a wake-up call, the incidents in this country on September 11. Listen to this. This is The Guardian, his secretary writing on his behalf. It says, you seem to complain about the calamities. Whoever was writing to him must have been talking about calamities. You seem to complain about the calamities that have befallen humanity. In the spiritual development of man, a stage of purgation is indispensable, for it is while passing through it that the overrated material needs are made to appear in their proper light. Unless society learns to attribute more importance to spiritual matters, it would never be fit to enter the golden era foretold by Baha'u'llah. The present calamities are parts of this process of purgation. Through them alone will man learn his lesson. They are to teach the nations that they have to view things internationally. They are to make the individual attribute more importance to his moral than his material welfare. In such a process of purgation, when all humanity is in the throes of dire suffering, the Baha'is should not hope to remain unaffected. Should we consider the beam that is in our own eye, we would immediately find that these sufferings are also meant for ourselves who claim to have attained. Such world crisis is necessary to awaken us to the importance of our duty and the carrying on of our task. Suffering will increase our energy in setting before humanity the road to salvation. It will move us from our repose, for we are far from doing our best in teaching the cause and conveying the message with which we have been entrusted. And finally, words of Baha'u'llah. Let not the happenings of the world sadden you. I swear by God, the sea of joy yearneth to attain your presence. For every good thing hath been created for you, and will, according to the needs of the times, be revealed unto you.
Following Mr. Mitchell's presentation, audience members were invited to ask questions. Mr. Mitchell was asked to comment on the needs of the international funds now that the Ark and Terraces have been completed. Mention was made of the recent letter from the Universal House of Justice reminding the Friends to continue supporting the International Fund.
Friends, I wasn't prepared to talk about money and funds and things of that nature. I thought that you have already a very clear understanding of the necessity of funding our projects. And given the great success that we have achieved in completing the structures on the Ark and the terraces of the Bab, it seemed only natural that you would understand that we can't keep those structures standing up without financial support. We have to maintain them. So it's a 2 + 2 = 4 kind of a question. It's just a matter of reminding you that that we have to do that. Just because the buildings have been built doesn't mean they don't need further support. Besides, we do have a tendency, a great many of us, to contribute when there is concrete that we can put our money in, but we don't consider that the faith has to be administered and that things have to be done, your letters have to be answered, books have to be published, all kinds of things have to be done that don't show a concrete building, but require enormous human energy. So funds have to be provided to take care of those requirements, both at all levels, local, national, continental, and international levels. So we leave this to your common sense and your good judgment and to your sense of generosity. I don't think that it would help for me to elaborate on what goes on in buildings, because what point is there? You must know that the buildings have a purpose, or otherwise they wouldn't be put up. And you know what happens here. You know what the story was with this house of worship that was built through such great sacrifice. This thing was started in the years of the Depression. And you consider the heroism of the people who contemplated beginning such a project, and the sacrifices that were made. And here is this building, and one has to keep it standing. And every once in a while, you have to spend a few millions doing that. We should do it cheerfully. At the same time, support the National Fund. You see, so we're Americans here, and we know that money counts. But last night, or whatever night it was, I was talking with the Friends in Atlanta. So the young Baha'is were asking me about professions and entering into professions and all kinds of things. So I took the opportunity to appeal to them not to be afraid of money, because money is not evil in itself. It's what we do with it that creates the problem. And after all, if there are Baha'is who can make money, why shouldn't they make the money? The faith of the needs of the faith are great. They have the hukuk that will purify their lump, and they can, they can contribute to all the other funds. And there is this strange psychology of materialism that sort of deadens our minds. I don't know, it does terrible things to us. And some of our young people don't want to make money because it's an evil thing. It's silly. I'd like to introduce them to the final 3 statements in the hidden words where Baha'u'llah tells us that we should get into trades and professions and earn wealth, because it's important to have money. So if you can make it, do it. If you don't have it, get some of it. And you know where you can put what you don't have to use.
Next, Mr. Mitchell was asked about the best methods of teaching, particularly on college campuses.
Friends, I'm never good at answering this kind of question for this reason, that I don't think that we Baha'is should approach our obligation to teaching the faith with the idea of methods in our head. I think that is a wrong idea. That we can learn, yeah, I really do. That we can learn about how others teach and that we can be given certain help in institutes and so on, that's perfectly fine. But the idea is not to teach us methods of teaching. The idea is really to give us the information and to encourage us to teach. Now, I don't know what method you would use. Let us say that you have a roommate, and you're living with that roommate, and you're able to observe that roommate. Isn't there some native intelligence that would suggest to you how you might open up the subject of the faith with that person? Why should you abandon your intelligence, your common sense, your ability to assess the situation on the ground or in your room, and to follow your own good sense as you measure that person's attitudes? Why wouldn't you be free to do that? So my point is, take advantage of the ruhi or the whatever it is that goes on that can offer you information if that's what you want to do, but don't get your head trained into methods of teaching. My dear friends, any person who believes in Baha'u'llah, who has the love of Baha'u'llah in his or her heart, can teach the faith. You don't need any method to teach the faith. What you need is the courage to do it. That's all. That's all. So I'm not going against anything, you understand me. I'm not going against summer schools, which are important, institutes which are absolutely important. The House of Justice just knocked itself out telling us what to do with them. But the House is trying to provide the means by which people can be educated so they will teach the faith. They're not trying to provide methods of teaching the faith. I don't think so. The counselors are here. I don't think that they were telling us that they were teaching us methods to teach the faith. But they were informing us, filling our hearts and minds with the right material so that we could teach the faith with confidence that we know what we're talking about. I think that is the emphasis of the thing. Now, whether the Ruhi method is suitable to you is irrelevant. That's your business. You choose anything you want. That's fine. The thing is to get on with the work of the cause. And friends, it's disturbing. It could be quite a paralysis for the community to indulge itself, the members, on matters of methods of teaching. Please don't do this. In college, invent your own style. If you don't have a method introduced to you by somebody, invent your own way of doing things. There are many opportunities there. My goodness, that's why you're going to school, so you can exercise your genius.